Motor just came up to me with his silk shorts on and said, Ox, if I knew that you was a loudmouth that you were.
All right, so today we're going to talk about 8 wrestlers who really didn't get along with Ox Baker. Some of the reasons might surprise you, while others are just kind of odd or unexpected. Either way, it's an interesting look at the backstage side of wrestling, so let's get into it and see what happened. Let's kick it off with one of the most infamous incidents in wrestling history, Ernie Ladd. Now, Ernie Ladd was a legit tough guy. Before wrestling, he was an NFL star, 6 feet 9 inches, over 300 pounds, and built like a wall. He transitioned into wrestling in the late 60s and quickly became one of the biggest names in the game. And his feud with Ox Baker, it was the stuff of legend. In 1974 in Cleveland, things got completely out of hand. Ox and Ernie were in the middle of a heated match, and after the final bell rang, Ox decided the fight wasn't over. He kept delivering heart punches to Ernie again and again. Now remember, fans were already buying into the heart punch as something dangerous. There had been real rumors in wrestling lore saying the move had caused heart attacks in the past. So when Ox kept pummeling Ernie long after the match had ended, the fans didn't just boo, they snapped. Chairs started flying. People stormed toward the ring. Some even pulled out weapons. It was chaos. The police had to break it up, and both wrestlers were lucky to leave the building unharmed. That riot gave Ox Baker an even more fearsome reputation, but it also crossed a line. Many believed he had gone too far, and Ernie Ladd reportedly wasn't happy with how out of control the situation got. In the world of wrestling, it's one thing to sell a match. It's another to risk lives in the process. Up next, let's talk about the Sheik, also known as Ed Farhat. Now, the Sheik was no stranger to violence himself. In fact, he practically invented the hardcore, anything-goes style that guys like Sabu and Mick Foley would later run with. He used pencils, fireballs, chairs, whatever he could get his hands on. So when you've got a guy like the Sheik going up against Ox Baker, you know things are going to be messy. And that's exactly what happened. Their matches weren't technical clinics. They were brutal brawls, blood, chaos, and total anarchy. But behind the scenes, there was tension. You had 2 strong personalities, both known for being hard to work with, trying to outdo each other. That doesn't usually end well. The Sheik was very particular about how he wanted his matches to go, and Ox, with his unpredictable style and heavy hands, wasn't exactly the easiest dance partner. Their feud might have looked incredible to fans, but inside the locker room, things weren't so smooth. There were egos clashing, disagreements on how matches should be laid out, and more than one instance where things got a little too real in the ring. Speaking of tough guys, let's move on to Harley Race, a name that carries weight in any wrestling conversation. Harley was a legit world champion, respected by just about everyone. He was tough, professional, and expected the same in return. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He let his work speak for itself. And when he stepped in the ring with Ox Baker, it was a clash of styles in more ways than one. Ox's character was big and dramatic, while Harley was all about gritty realism. Their matches were usually built around that contrast. But here's the thing, Harley wasn't a fan of guys who were stiff or reckless. He believed in protecting your opponent and telling a story without actually hurting the other guy. Ox didn't always get that memo. There were times Ox laid it in a little too hard. And when you're in there with someone like Harley, who prided himself on precision and professionalism, that kind of sloppiness was a big problem. Harley reportedly didn't care much for Ox's in-ring approach and thought he made things more dangerous than they needed to be. They had several matches for the NWA title across different territories, but from what many old-school wrestlers have said, Harley wasn't sad when those bookings ended. Now let's talk about someone whose reputation matched Ox's for unpredictability, Bruiser Brody. Brody was a wild man. He was athletic, intense, and always made sure his matches felt like fights. Fans loved his energy, and other wrestlers respected his commitment until they didn't. If he felt like someone was trying to show him up or was being unprofessional, he didn't hold back. When Brody worked with Ox, it was bound to be explosive. Both men were known for working stiff. Both had big personalities. But where Brody's chaos felt controlled, Ox's sometimes just came off as clumsy or out of step. There are stories, though hard to confirm, that suggest Brody and Ox had a few backstage arguments about how matches should go. And when you've got two stubborn veterans trying to one-up each other, it usually doesn't lead to happy endings. Then there's Ronnie Garvin, Hands of Stone. Garvin was another no-nonsense guy. He wasn't the biggest wrestler, but he was incredibly tough. He made a name for himself in the Mid-Atlantic and Georgia territories and had a reputation for laying in his shots. And when he feuded with Ox Baker, things got real in a hurry. One story from their rivalry that still gets passed around is the time Garvin reportedly smashed Ox's dentures during a match. Whether that was an accident or a receipt for something Ox had done earlier, we may never know. But what's clear is that Garvin wasn't someone to mess with, and when he felt Ox crossed a line, he made sure to send a message. Their feud got intense, and it was one of those rivalries that felt like there was a little extra real emotion behind every move. Garvin, like others on this list, just didn't have a lot of patience for guys who didn't take care of their opponents. And Ox, with his aggressive heart punch and wild swings, often came off as careless. And then comes Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream. Dusty was a master of storytelling. He could connect with the crowd like no one else. His promos were electric, and in the ring he told stories that had fans living and dying with every near fall. When Dusty feuded with Ox Baker, it was classic good versus evil. Dusty with his working man charm and charisma, and Ox with his monstrous look and vicious style. But behind the curtain, Dusty wasn't thrilled with how Ox worked. Dusty's matches were all about building momentum, using psychology, and making the crowd feel something. Ox, on the other hand, often disrupted that rhythm. His offense could be awkward, his selling was inconsistent, and he had a habit of throwing the match off track. Dusty wasn't the kind of guy to cause drama for no reason, but when someone messed with the story he was trying to tell in the ring, he wasn't quiet about it. His clashes with Ox weren't explosive, but they definitely weren't friendly either. So far, we've talked about 6 big names: Ernie Ladd, the Sheik, Harley Race, Bruiser Brody, Ronnie Garvin, and Dusty Rhodes, who had some real tension with Ox Baker, either in the ring or behind the scenes. Whether it was because of Ox's rough style, unpredictable behavior, or just a complete clash in personality, the message was clear. Ox Baker wasn't the easiest guy to work with. But why did so many wrestlers have issues with him? Part of it was the era. The 70s and early 80s were full of big personalities, and the wrestling business was incredibly territorial. Everyone was trying to protect their spot, and when someone came along who was unpredictable or didn't follow the unspoken rules, it ruffled feathers. Ox had this raw, chaotic energy that made him stand out, but it also made him a bit of a wild card in the locker room. He was never known as a polished technician, in fact, quite the opposite. His movements were clunky, his selling could be inconsistent, and his promos were more about volume than finesse. That didn't sit well with guys like Harley Race or Dusty Rhodes, who prided themselves on telling stories inside the ring. Even brawlers like Bruiser Brody or the Sheik, who thrived in violence, found Ox to be hard to trust in a match. It also didn't help that Ox carried a kind of unpredictable vibe. One minute he'd be going along with the match just fine, and the next he'd be throwing punches a little too stiff or taking things in a direction that hadn't been agreed upon beforehand. That made opponents nervous, because when you're in a wrestling match, there's a deep level of trust required. You're handing your body over to someone else and trusting they won't hurt you. And with Ox, that line seemed blurry sometimes. One of the best examples of this was the situation with Ernie Ladd. That Cleveland riot in 1974 didn't just cause a scene, it was a turning point. Wrestlers saw how Ox played into the chaos, how he kept going when maybe he should have stopped, and it made them wonder, was Ox trying to protect the business or just trying to get himself over at any cost? And let's be honest, Ox kind of leaned into the hate. He thrived on being disliked. He embraced the boos. He lived for the controversy. But that kind of energy doesn't just stay in the ring. It spills backstage, into the locker room, into travel days and pre-match meetings. If you constantly walk around with your character turned up to 100, it gets hard for people to separate the act from the real you. And for Ox Baker, the line between character and person was paper thin. Yet despite all that, you can't deny he left a mark. Fans remember Ox Baker. They remember the look, The heart punch, the riots, the chaos. He was never a world champion. He was never the face of a major company, but he was memorable. And love him or hate him, he did what a heel is supposed to do. He made you feel something. Still, the trail of frustrated opponents and behind-the-scenes tension left its own kind of legacy. Guys like Garvin, Race, and Ladd didn't speak kindly about their time working with Ox. Not because he was the worst wrestler ever, but because he made their jobs harder. And in an industry that relies so much on teamwork and timing, that's enough to create real resentment. In the end, Ox Baker was a product of his time. Larger than life, unapologetically wild, and often impossible to control. He made waves, sold tickets, and built a career off being feared. But with that came burned bridges, bruised egos, and more than a few wrestlers who were happy to never share the ring with him again. If you enjoyed this look into wrestling's untold backstage drama, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss a story from wrestling's golden days. Got a favorite Ox Baker moment or feud we didn't mention? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.